So there's this war crimes trial happening in Uganda, and it's been decades in the making. But this isn't just any trial. It's forcing an entire nation to ask a really tough question. What does justice even look like when a perpetrator was first a victim? Let's get into the story of that trial. And to really get what's at stake here, you have to hear it from the people who lived through this. Let's start with this just chilling testimony from a survivor, a woman named Margaret. You know, that one sentence, it just tells you everything. This trial, it's not about lawyers and legal arguments in a courtroom. It's about these incredibly deep, personal scars that were left on thousands and thousands of people. So Margaret was with her friends when rebels from the Lord's Resistance Army, you'll hear them called the LRA, found them. And the only reason she wasn't killed right then and there, she was pregnant. But instead of killing her, they maimed her, just horrifyingly. And you'd think that would be the end of the horror, but no. The trauma just kept going. When she finally got back home, she was completely ostracized. She talks about how her own neighbors would insult her, and even her children, all because of her wounds. I mean, can you imagine? A constant, painful reminder of everything she'd been through? And this is the part that's just so hard to wrap your head around, the sheer scale of it all. Margaret's story is just one. She's one of thousands of people who were maimed, abducted, or killed during this brutal 20-year civil war. So, the question is, how did one single rebel army manage to cause so much pain for so long? Well, to understand that, we've got to look at the LRA's whole campaign of terror across northern Uganda. For more than 20 years, the LRA waged a war that just terrorized the entire region. Their name, LRA, it became a byword for a kind of cruelty that was systematic and just uniquely brutal. Yeah, and their tactics, they weren't like a normal army at all. They went after civilians on purpose. They burned whole villages to the ground. And this is the key part. They fueled their ranks by abducting children, literally kidnapping kids and forcing them to become fighters, porters, or even sex slaves. So now, after all this time, for the very first time ever, one of the alleged commanders from this brutal army is actually facing a court of law. Okay, so the trial itself is happening in Gulu, which was pretty much the epicenter of the whole conflict. And the man on trial, his name is Thomas Kwoyelo. He was part of the LRA for almost 20 years. But here's where it gets really complicated. Kwoyelo's path to that courtroom, it's not straightforward, because he himself was abducted by the LRA in the first place. He was captured back in 2009 by the Ugandan army, and now here he is on trial. It forces you to look at this whole journey, from victim to alleged perpetrator. All right, so the prosecution's case rests on 12 counts of war crimes. They're arguing that he didn't just stay a victim, he rose through the ranks and actually led a bunch of attacks on civilians, attacks just like the one Margaret survived. For his part, Kwoyelo has pleaded not guilty to everything. But this is where the whole case gets turned on its head. The defense brings up a question that really gets to the core of the LRA's entire horrific legacy. And this really lays out the central dilemma, doesn't it? On one side, you have the prosecution saying, this man was a commander responsible for terrible atrocities. But on the other side, the defense is saying, hold on, this was a kid who was abducted. He's a victim himself. And now you're forcing him to carry the blame for the entire LRA? Right, his defense team basically says, look, they can't get their hands on the big leaders, the top brass. So what are they doing? They're piling the weight of the entire insurgency onto this one guy. And it raises this huge question. How do you even begin to prosecute a system where the victims were forced to become the perpetrators? So with all these incredible complexities in play, what does this trial actually mean for the people of northern Uganda? The ones who've been waiting for decades for any kind of accountability. Well, for a community that has had to live with these memories for decades, just seeing someone in a courtroom being held accountable for what happened, that alone is a hugely powerful and totally unprecedented moment. But, and this is a big but, complete justice still feels a long, long way off. Why? Because the LRA's notorious leader, the architect of this whole reign of terror, Joseph Kony, he's never been captured. He's still out there, at large. So even though this trial is messy and it's complicated, for the people in Gulu, it's something. It's a formal acknowledgement of everything they went through. It's a glimmer of hope, Really, it's the first real step towards some kind of legal reckoning after 2 decades of just unimaginable brutality. And in the end, this trial in Uganda isn't just about Uganda. It forces all of us to think about one of the hardest questions there is after a conflict ends. How does a nation ever find justice when the lines between victim and perpetrator are so deeply, deeply blurred?